This is the eLearning Podcast, episode number 59.
What was most interesting is a lot of parents, a lot of my friends discovered that their kids have a learning difference during the pandemic, which is not unusual considering that the national, I think understood.org did like a national survey, and 72% of the parents were like, I think my kid has a learning difference.
Welcome to the eLearning Podcast. My name is Ladek, and I'm your host from lmspulse.com. My guest for today is Suchi Deshpande, who is the co-founder of Learnfully, a personalized learning platform with neurodivergence as its main focus. Suchi discovered the idea for her platform after realizing how difficult it was for her kids to find an educational experience suitable for their needs. The idea truly came to life when she also realized how difficult it was to socialize the simple idea that different children need different ways of learning. In this enlightening conversation, Suchi and I talk about why neurodivergent learning approaches are gaining traction, especially because of the COVID crisis. It's not just for accessibility, it's a fight against classroom anxiety. We also take a deep dive into executive functioning skills and the way they evolve as children develop. And are you sure your kids' education is meeting them where they truly excel? We also talk about the origin of Learnfully, where Suchi's tech background allows for a personalized learning experience that lets parents keep close track of their kids' progress through a fine-tuned analytic platform. And then finally, Suchi and I talk about the global appeal of neurodivergent learning and why personalized platforms like Suchi's might become part of your children's education sooner than you think. But before we get started, a quick word from our sponsors.
The eLearning Podcast is sponsored by the eLearning Success Summit. Learn from more than 40 experts how to teach, work, and learn online without being overwhelmed. Get your free ticket to the summit at elearningsuccesssummit.com. And lmspulse.com, your best source for news, information, and resources for e-learning professionals for more than 10 years. Get our free roundup of the week's top news at lmspulse.com.
Hello, Suchi. Welcome to the eLearning Podcast. How are you today?
Great. Thank you for having me, Stephen. It's very nice to meet you.
My pleasure. I am sitting in Mexico City, as everyone here listening knows. Where do we find you sitting today?
I'm in the Bay Area near San Francisco. So not that far away from you, but I think I wish I were in Mexico City.
I wish I were in Mexico City too. I gotta be honest with you. No, it's fantastic down here. Suchi, I have already, as everybody knows, I tee you up in the intro to the show here, but I want to give you the opportunity to give the 20, 30 seconds on who you are, and sort of a little bit about Learnfully, which is what we're going to be talking about today.
Sure. So my name is Suchi. I'm the co-founder and head of product at Learnfully, which is an online platform for personalized learning. This is specifically for neurodivergent learners. So neurodivergent is a concept that's essentially starting to become more and more important. Right now, 20% of the kids on paper have some kind of a learning difference. And this is only on paper. There's a lot of them who choose not to get diagnosed. So the number is actually much, much bigger. And actually up to 60% of adults, probably have an undiagnosed learning difference. So the reason it's so important right now is because before, there was like a scaffolding, there was a little more patience, there were fewer students in the classroom. And so there was a way for these kids, who were smart, but struggling in certain areas to kind of work around and, find their way around it. But now it's like, the schools are just, the enrollment is exploding, especially in states like California, and getting services and help is not always the easiest. It really depends on the district that you're in. But the thing is, the teachers' hands are a little tight. About 70% of them don't feel comfortable, like even telling someone that, hey, I think this kid has a learning difference and may need something different. And the onus is on the parents to essentially prove this. And proving that is a 1 to 2 year process. There's a whole slew of things. Yeah, I know. It's like, let's try more of the same because the kid's just not trying hard. And then, let's wait 8 months for this appointment. We have a list of problems. Now what? What is the solution? So it's a very, very long and drawn out process. And in the meantime, the kids falling further and further behind, and the anxiety levels are increasing. So again, these kids are smart. They understand that they're not consuming the auditory information, which is the primary form of how things are taught in classroom, when compared to their peers. And so what they start doing is they start forming behaviors. And so your stubbornness, I don't want to do my homework, all this starts coming from, they don't want to do it, but they don't want you to know that they can't do it. So essentially it builds this anxiety, and it builds up this wall, which only gets higher and higher if the issue is not, remediated at like a younger age. So teachers don't have the training, it's not like the rates of diagnoses are going up. It's just that, there's just more to do. And just this one size fits all teaching style is not enough for the students in America anymore.
Super cool. Final question before I want to dive down this rabbit hole with you.
Okay.
I've been using the podcast as a bit of a time capsule for the pandemic. And so we are recording this on the very last day of August in 2021. What is the Bay Area like in terms of pandemia?
In terms of pandemia, I would say that it's been different in different pockets. Some areas, parents are having a harder time essentially trying to do their job from home, and also, trying to get their kids online and in Zoom. It's been very problematic for kids with, for parents with younger kids, because, especially when you're in kindergarten, first grade, second grade. So my kids were going to a private school, so they've been in schools, which we've been very fortunate with, but everyone else around us has pretty much had their kids. So again, because of this, rates of anxiety are going up, and believe it or not, anxiety is a huge learning difference, because it's so different when you have a room with 20 kids in Zoom versus in person. There's just that formality that just doesn't exist when you're in person. So I would say that it's been very much a mixed bag of which kids are thriving and which kids are not. I will say, though, that what was most interesting is a lot of parents, a lot of my friends discovered that their kids have a learning difference during the pandemic, which is not unusual, considering that the national, I think understood.org did like a national survey, and 72% of the parents were like, I think my kid has a learning difference.
Interesting.
And yeah, so I think
72%?
72%. Yeah.
That's like 3/4 of parents suddenly woke up one day. Okay, so let's start our conversation right there. I'm a parent. I got 3 kids. I feel like I know them pretty well. Granted, over the last 18 months, I've gotten to know them quite, a lot better. We are super happy that they are in school over the, they started school last month. Pardon me. How is it that parents, 3/4 of parents woke up over the pandemic and be like, wait a second, I think there's, we need to take a left turn, or we need to do something differently here. Like, can you help me understand that?
Absolutely. So it depends on the sample size. Obviously we all know that. We're not taking into account any parents who already have, a diagnosis and are very comfortable with that fact. And they're taking into account parents who were involved with their kids. So whatever that sample size was, within Zoom, I think, when people say learning difference, so this is the thing, learning difference means I don't get it. When I say something, why are they just not absorbing it, right? So a developmental delay could be a learning difference. So, people talk about, there's different learning styles and how, one of us is made of like maybe 2, 3 or more of those. So the thing is, most kids are visual learners. When you have ADHD and stuff, you're a highly visual learner. So when you are not consuming information, as in the most efficient way, when it's done through Zoom, then it's a little concerning for parents, because now they have to essentially step in and say, okay, now what? And also this is more common for kids with younger parents. So there's this whole thing called executive functioning, which actually has nothing to do with IQ. It's the frontal lobe of the brain. and it evolves until you're 25.
Mm-hmm.
This is essentially, kids who have their stuff together.
Right.
So it has about 7 or 8 components, where it's planning, organizing, visual memory, auditory memory, processing. So anything, right? Even if you're inattentive, if you lost a page or if you lost a homework, like even disorganization leads to chaos. So this is even considered a learning difference, because now parents are realizing that, oh my God, it's like one teacher can't do it all.
So because I want to dial back even further now, and
go for it. Yeah.
And just give sort of a perspective of neurodiversity, and for anybody who's listening to this for the first time, who may want a better definition of that, what a learning difference is. You just given several great examples, because so let's first go there, and then I want to then I have my next question, which is sort of about the parent who. Anyway, let's talk about neurodiversity first. Like, I know that this has definitely popped up on my radar over the last 24 months, an awful lot, right? We've had some people at what's called the eLearning Success Summit who talk a lot about it, especially with accessibility and online learning and those kinds of things. It's really huge. Even the colors that you use on the screen, or how you ask to click, and those are really important pieces, right? Tell us about, can you just give us the foundation? What is neurodiversity? What are learning differences? And then what would I do as a parent if I, sort of take me through like kind of a step-by-step, you said it's like a 1 to 2 year process to determine if this is a real thing for my child. Yeah. And then we'll go down the path of Learnfully and kind of that kind of thing.
Yeah. So neurodiversity was actually a term coined by the autism industry, where and this happened a while ago. I'm not sure exactly how many years ago that was, but that's essentially the origin of it. But since then, what has happened is, folks with ADHD, dyslexia, dysgraphia, like any kind of learning difference, have adopted that, because they're like, I'm neurodivergent. I think differently. Like I'm not, I don't process information the same way. So it's become a more accepted term for anyone who essentially has, a learning difference diagnosis, if you will. But now what's starting to happen is that, people are realizing the importance of executive functioning. Okay. And this is something that, a lot of parents are starting to realize that, my kid's not taking all the notes, he's not as organized, or she's, losing stuff. And, I give her instructions in an auditory way, and she doesn't get it. Like, I'll give you an example. Like my son, right, when he was in kindergarten, the teacher was like, I don't think he knows his ABCs. And we're like, what? Because we've been drilling that into him.
Sure, yeah.
Since he was like a kid. And then turns out the kid actually can do his ABCs, but it's just in a room of like 20 kids. There's auditory processing issues. So the instructions kind of go over his head. But when she wrote the instructions down, he was doing them very quickly. That was not an issue. So there's a lot of examples like this where, people think that they can't do it, but the reality is the information just has to be given to them in a way where they can essentially consume it and then produce it. And like another example is my friend, she said she was like talking to her son, who all of a sudden got good at math in 4th, 5th grade. And she's like, I don't get it. Like, what changed between 2nd grade and now? And he's like, well, I have weak motor skills. I mean, that's not what he said, but he said, well, we're not using pencil and paper. Now we're using computers. So it's just a lot faster. And so I think what's really important to note over here is that, there's a difference between, can they do it, in general, versus is there a way you can harness it so they can do it? So you're finding more and more examples of these where people get confused and just say, oh my God, they can't do this. But the reality is they can. It's just, you have to find their path and then, essentially generalize it. So I think it's become a very vague term.
Okay, so that kind of takes me to the next one. When I, again, as a parent, I'm going to play devil's advocate for a moment. when
Go for it.
you put on the table, I'm sure that there are a portion of the listeners that are listening right now and say, wait, a disorganized kid? I mean, my
That's everyone.
my teenager couldn't fold his
Yep.
clothes if his life depended on it, or
Yep.
my second grader misses stuff every time. And it's the classic thing where a parent will go in and be like, it's right here in your closet, like you were staring right at it. So a two-part question. One, what did we do before 2020? Right? Like, what was happening before 2020? Where was this just like a forgotten thing, or what? It just didn't happen. And then second, like, how do I make the difference, or how do I determine this is just a normal kid who's got normal stuff, like, hey, I'm a forgetful teenager or whatever, and somebody who really has something that we need to work on? I guess it's a three-part question. And like, can you work on these things and you work out of them? Like you just said, it was like a learning development thing. So there's my three-part question for you. I apologize.
No worries. So the 3-part. So just so I have them down, the 3 parts. So what did we do before 2020? Every kid is disorganized. So what does that mean?
Well, yeah. So what did we do before 2020? And then, how do I tell the difference between just like a normal kid who's kind of, hey, they forget things, they do this, they can't tie their shoes, whatever, and someone who has a real issue that needs to be worked on? And then is there, you've got Learnfully, you're saying these are pathways. Are there pathways out of these things that aren't obviously like there's a chemical imbalance or there's a developmental, like a physical actual issue?
Yeah. So before 2020, it was definitely a struggle. Like, I was a parent, my son got diagnosed, I want to say in 2014 with both ASD and ADHD. My second kid got diagnosed with ADHD, I want to say in 2017, 2018. But the thing is, I was not getting the right level of help, even from the psychologists. Like, they would tell you this list of problems, and it was just not, helpful. It's like, what do you do with this list, right? And so it was really a struggle to essentially understand, okay, now what? And your options are, okay, you belong in this bucket or that bucket, but nothing in between, right? So when you go to a public school, and we tried that, it did not work. He actually regressed because, he's a smart kid. He has some challenges, but he's a smart kid. And he noticed that when he behaved badly, he would get more attention. So that's what he started doing. So, so through this journey, I was a working mom. My husband started his own company. So it was definitely, and I had a second kid. So it was kind of chaotic.
We had lots of time. Yeah.
We had lots of time. But we were very fortunate that we found someone who really emphasized the importance of, let's find his strengths, let's find his interests, because that together forms motivation to learn something. And then let's use that to remediate his challenges. Because what started happening is, like, in schools, the kids just hear, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that, like, you can't button your shirt. I mean, I'm like, I don't care if he doesn't tie a shoelace, fine, I'll buy him Velcro shoes for the rest of his life, But the idea of him putting in 20 hours of therapy to kind of show that you can't do something versus, like, he's this piano savant now, like, that just made a difference, right? Like, hey, kid, this is what you can do. These are your challenges. So whatever. So that was something that needed to shine before 2020, and it didn't. Because, parents often think that they're stuck in public school, and, most people can't afford it. It's I recognize the fact that we're privileged and we come from means. And so we were able to provide this for a kid. But most people, struggle with that, and they don't know what to do. They didn't have the person that, we had. Now, moving forward, how do you tell the difference between, like, a normal kid and an EF, a kid who really has an issue? The thing is, if you're, by the way, I'm not a doctor. Please talk to your psychologist.
Sure, absolutely, of course.
Absolutely. But from what I've seen, with my friends and parents, is if there's a problem that's just persisting, and it's, instead of, like, the kid just doing it, it's turning into behaviors, where essentially, and you're just not able to resolve it, and you're at the end of the rope, then that means that there is something else that needs to happen. You have to kind of do it in a different way. And often, also, if, people, about 50% of them think, especially parents, think that kids will just outgrow their learning differences. That's true for some of them who have that neural network there and can essentially have that cognitive flexibility to just do whatever. But for a lot of them, that may not happen. They might, probably just end up having a low credit score at 25 and then learn their lesson. But, it's just not gonna happen overnight. And so, so for the ones who you feel are stuck, there's absolutely a way. It's called neuroplasticity. So essentially, it's expanding till you're 25. So now what you're doing is, instead of having them figure it out, you're being prescriptive and putting down a path for, this is exactly how you do it, and you gradually just take the training wheels off. So talk to an expert, first, obviously, before you try to do your own thing. But there's plenty of behavior therapists, executive functioning coaches, who can essentially help your kid, try and get over like this hump and this anxiety of, I'm just stupid, or, I can't get myself organized. There's a lot of people who do that. For someone who's probably more normal, or neurotypical, they'll just be willing to try stuff. They're like, okay, whatever, it might be an issue for 2 days, but it's not like this persisting serious issue,
right.
That's happening across all environments. Like, he's probably not moving his clothes out from under the bed, but he has no issues bringing his homework home and, is submitting everything on time.
Right.
So, yeah. So I think it really depends. And it depends also on where, as a family, you want the emphasis to be.
Sure. And it sounds like at the end of the day, it would be like anything, if the pain in your arm persists over a day or two, not, take a couple aspirin and forget about it. But, hey, if this is going on for weeks, you probably want to go see a doctor and get some tests. And so the same thing with a child, or any kind of learner, where it's, if you see a behavior persisting for a long time, and that's why we have these support networks, right? That's why we have these professionals. And best case scenario, you go get a diagnosis, or you go get some tests, and maybe they come back and say, hey, you know what? Just this is a thing that, they're going to grow out of it. And that would be the great answer. But then, so, okay, cool. So,
Yeah.
When did Learnfully like pop up for you? So you have 2 children who are neurodivergent, and so this was a thing. So was Learnfully born? Is this the classic entrepreneur story where this is kind of born out of necessity, or born out of, hey, I saw this problem, and so I'm going to create a solution for it? Or what was that story?
I would say it's a little bit of both, as it goes. So yeah, I, had 2 kids. They're both neurodivergent. I was working in the enterprise software space. I'm in the tech industry. And it was, so this problem always existed, right? So I told you the story about this person who helped us in the strengths and interest base. So it was just interesting to me, because I just got sucked into that world, because I was so hands-on when it came to, putting my son's program in place, if you will. And I was learning something new every year. I'm like, oh my God, like you're never done as a parent. It's like every year there's like a new thing, right? And I'm like, what is this? I know. So I think whether I wanted to or not, I started getting sucked into it more and more. Excuse me. Whether I wanted to or not, I was getting sucked into it more and more. And it actually became quite interesting. And then fast forward a few years, I started realizing that every parent I spoke to, diagnosis or not, they were going through the same 2 years of frustration. And it's like, I'm like, this has got to be easier. And so I guess I was at a different point in my life where I was out of the denial phase and, well into acceptance, and this is our new norm. And so I started seeing things that other parents were not necessarily seeing. And then I also started seeing them make the mistakes of just going with whatever options available versus really trying to understand what is best for your child, which is not easy to come by, depending on the area that you live in. And so with this in mind, I was like, I can't do enterprise anymore. So I quit and worked for an autism clinic called Appia, where I built out technology, to help manage, to help caregivers help manage like the communication around your different therapies. And over there, that's when I think the bell went off, when I was like, oh my God, like autism is like maybe between 2 and 5%, but learning differences are 20%, 20 plus percent. And parents, they get concerned about speech behavior, but education is right up there in terms of, what are you concerned about? And started digging more and more, found this whole market called education therapy, which only applies to someone who can spend $20,000 per summer, getting their kid to read. I know some of the
back that up for me, because you've just, and I'm not sure if I should be embarrassed or
no, that's fine.
Or well, this is my space. Education therapy. Hit me with that. Like, so you just break that down for a second for me.
Absolutely. So education therapy is essentially, where you have multisensory curriculum. So in school, in gen ed, the curriculum is geared mostly again towards auditory learning and some visual learning. I don't want to say this for everyone. Obviously, I'm generalizing, but there's some teachers who are good about that. But education therapy is geared towards your learners' strengths and how they consume information, but keep the curriculum the same. Okay. So you have things like Orton Gillingham, which is a much more visual way of teaching a kid. So someone with dyslexia, they have trouble decoding. Which means just reading, right? Just recognizing. And so Orton Gillingham tends to be a really good curriculum for them. So is Wilson, to help absorb the concepts and foundations in their own way, so they can essentially use those strategies that work for their brain. They also work with the concept of neuroplasticity, which again is over here, you're creating new neural networks, new pathways, with this curriculum. So often it takes a year or two to essentially generalize something like this, because now, you're learning this new concept and you're trying to apply it in like a world that doesn't support it. So that translation essentially is going to take a good year or two for the kids to apply it in their world. Same for autism. So what's interesting is kids with autism have no problem decoding, ADHD too, but they have trouble comprehending. And this drove me crazy. And I was like, I would do homework with my kid and I'm like, how could you not understand what you just read? But then I realized that it was a working memory thing. They were just not holding enough information. So there's a program for that called Verbalizing and Visualizing by Linda Mood Bell, which essentially, works on the thing of if you can't visualize it, if you can't picture it, you can't comprehend it. So there's a whole, methodology in terms of getting them to essentially visualize this and then, comprehend it. So there's this whole underbelly, like I had no idea as well, that exists to help kids like this, but it's very expensive. It requires someone who has both child development experience and teaching experience. So the bar is like very, very high, essentially to, teach in this area. And also not a lot of people know that this exists. So that's why they keep banging their head against the same wall, instead of trying to pick one of these curriculums. Okay, fantastic. So what does Learnfully provide? Like what's, how it sounds like there's this, this network of specialists that are already out there. There are these, these pieces that are, is that what you're doing? You're throwing together the puzzle pieces or what you said was, wait, I don't think it needs to be a 2-year process in order to get from, hey, maybe my kid has a problem to tangible, real solutions. Yeah. Over to you. What does Learnfully do, right? Okay. So, by the way, if I'm going down I feel like I'm going down too many rabbit holes. Is that okay? Not at all. You're doing fantastic. Okay. I'm learning a ton. That means that everybody is. So. Okay. All right. Great. So the whole reason why Learnfully exists is because you can tell that I've had a very rich life experience in the last 5 years. And, I think from that, it was like, oh my God, like, I need to start this company. I knew I didn't want to be the CEO. So that's when I pulled in my old boss who who I worked with 12 years ago to essentially take on as CEO. And I've been trying to start a company with her forever. But, and then when she saw this, she was like, oh my God, we need to do this, because even my kid who has no diagnosis essentially is having some issues during
Sure.
COVID. So this is the thing, like we're on to something. And so brought her over, started the company. And the whole problem that we're trying to solve is you do not need a diagnosis for your kid to essentially get those resources and have the ability to start making progress. So we actually have, we are a whole system. We start with an assessment that is research-based, that does, we don't give diagnoses. What we do is we take the traits of what is your working memory like, where are you at in terms of your reading skills? Like, where should you be? Are you having trouble decoding? Are you having trouble comprehending? So, we take all that into consideration and then create a customized plan for you, so you can start the remediation, whether it's reading, math, writing, spelling, or even comprehending at a much quicker pace. We have a head of education services, called Jess Crane, who actually used to, she's a multisensory expert. She's been doing this for many, many years. She's worked in famous institutions, just training folks and bringing them on. So all our therapists that essentially come on are essentially that, which is they have child development experience and they have education experience. So they can kind of bring the walls down and really get through to a kid. It's just really beautiful. And then once that happens, once the kid latches on, they start making progress.
Awesome.
And now our whole goal is that parents always get left out. We don't know what's happening. Like, are they learning? Are they not learning? And so our whole goal is to even provide transparency to the caregivers. So who is this person? So we have monthly check-ins with them. We have weekly progress updates with them. We take data. So because of my tech background, I'm like really interested in having a profile on the kid where where they started and how they're making progress. Because say if they're ready to step up to the next goal, we have this clear path, right? Versus like jumping from tutor to tutor like every 2 months. So you can see the journey in terms of how your kid is progressing. And now if we feel like, hey, this is not working, the kid is not progressing, we can be proactive now because we have this data that we're collecting, both quantitative and qualitative, to be able to show caregivers, where your kids will be. Now, what we're doing is we are in the process of submitting a proposal to the NSF where we're building out an algorithm where, based on the kid's profile, the executive functioning and skills and goals, we can predict how long it's going to take for them to essentially reach their goals. Yeah, so very excited about that.
Yeah, that's super exciting stuff.
Yeah, and because what we want to do is, we want parents to have the ability to say that, I know if I go to Learnfully that I'll get my questions answered, my kids' needs met. And this is important because when I was a parent, like anytime I would ask a therapist a question, because I would have a lot of anxiety myself, I would get a lot of non-answers.
Sure. Oh, I hate that. Absolutely.
I hate that too. Yeah. Right. And I know. And so it's built on that premise that we're going to be transparent. If it's working, it's working. If it's not, we're going to try something else. So that is our goal, is that you come in with, kids' educational needs or executive function needs, whether it's single or in a group, we can, help you and, see, and you can see how your kid is going through that journey as well.
So 2 more questions then. What's the age range that you're looking at and that you normally serve? And then do learners essentially graduate from Learnfully? Is there's a moment where you're like, hey, you know what? we're done
Yeah.
here. It's
Yeah.
time for you to move on.
Yeah. So K through 12 is typically the age range that we serve. Learners do graduate from Learnfully. In fact, our therapists, typically have a goal of keeping the kid on for like a year or two at the most.
Okay.
But now, if new problems arise, meaning if the kid can read now, but if there's issues with, now he's in 5th grade and there's book report writing that needs to happen, we can help with that. Or the kid's in 6th grade and they need executive functioning skills. They need to understand how to kind of keep things together.
Right.
We have a program for that. So yeah, we do have micro programs and you can graduate. By the way, you can even, if you want to leave right after taking the assessment, that's fine too. So you can, essentially just graduate in this micro program and be happy with it. But what's funny is, it's not funny, but the parents, we've had 100% retention rate so far because
Nice.
they trust it, they like it. Now the data is only, we only started in February, so we're still young, but it's been very consistent in terms that no, you're meeting our needs right now. We trust you, so we're going to kind of keep this on until you say my kid's done and he can move on.
Tell me about, I noticed on the front page of your website, one of the profiles that you put out there is your kid, I think it's super serious, maybe too much so, or you're super organized, or maybe too. Tell me about that divergence. What is that? Because that sounds kind of like every parent's dream, like what's that all about?
You would think that. I know a few kids like that. That has to do with cognitive flexibility. So often when someone is that, for lack of a better term, OCD about how things should be, they will have a very hard time functioning when things are kind of not set a certain way. So it's going to start making them anxious. They're just like not very flexible. And so the whole goal is to teach them to essentially increase their level of flexibility so they can, work better like in a team and maybe also not panic when a question on the test is not worded the exact way that they would expect it. Yeah.
So I've just a couple of questions I want to ask. What about the company? Is this self-funded? Are you bringing in investors? Like, how does it feel? You're a woman who is both in tech, but then also now you're an entrepreneur. This is a very sexy topic right now. Give me that menage. Like, are you all in on this, or do you have a bunch of seed funders? Like, what's the business look like?
Yeah. So we are at the seed stage. We essentially do have a mix of angels and VCs who have invested in us. We're always looking for investors, but right now, it's funny, like women and tech, it's like, you're right, it is like a very sexy thing, but I think there is still a misnomer that this is a small market, which is not the case at all. In fact, we've made progress, like the ones that we speak to, we've made progress essentially much faster than companies, who are tech and essentially have our plan like a year and a half out. But I think people continue to think that, that's just beginner's luck, or, this is like not a real issue. But, that's not the case. It's, I think everyone's like waiting for us to see, okay, let's wait for the next round, or, okay, let's wait for, so they keep like pushing their goal. They're like hedging their bets, like your classic VCs. Which is fine, but but we have plenty of angels who are like, yep, my kid had this issue, sign me up. Right. So when it comes to investing, we're definitely in the mode of like, people either get it or they don't. And the ones who get it are like, yeah, I don't understand why people don't get it, and I get it. Like it's
sure.
Not an easy topic to dig into. There's a long onboarding process, but but we're seed funded. We do want to be VC backed because our whole thing is right now, we are, we're mostly services, but what we really want to do is have the ability to even reach like the lower income families, using both product and services. So like a combination of that. So that way, kids who maybe can't access a tutor for, X amount of dollars an hour, now have the ability to actually just talk to, have like an asynchronous education, or like watch videos along with a live person checking in once in a while to see how they're doing. We want to go into schools. And, like just kind of raise the bar, like, especially if we have this algorithm, we can say that, hey, how are your state scores going to be, right? So we're just really waiting for that story to happen. Yeah, and we actually are even really getting pulled into independent schools, because they tend to be more forward thinking and have a lot of inclusion programs. So they really see the value of executive functioning. And so the middle schoolers, the parents, they're very, very excited and interested with what we have to offer. But in terms of it being mainstream, I think that's slowly happening. I think, believe it or not, COVID has helped, kind of.
I'm sure it has. Absolutely.
This topic up. Yeah. But yeah, so that's where we're at. We're ahead of the game for sure. Cool. But there's still a lot of education that needs to happen.
So education is a clear challenge. What are maybe one or two of the other challenges as somebody who's, 10 months into a startup, you're on market, you're bringing in clients. Is it just, bringing people into the pipeline? Is it product development and service development? Like where are your hiccups? Where have you, I'm always interested. It's like, it's easy to tell the good story. Where have you fallen flat? Like where, and where have you pivoted along the way?
That's a good question. I would say that, definitely education has been the main crux of the issue. And also urgency has been another one. Now they're more or less the same, but the reality is parents who come in, through a referral source, like a speech therapist, they convert, no problem. They see the value in it. They're like, boom, I'm in. Now, where, essentially we need a little more nurturing, and it's starting to happen. Actually, the floodgates are really starting to open, especially with executive functioning and social emotional learning. Parents are slowly coming in, via Google, via Facebook. Sure. But I would say that education, I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time getting away from that education part, because that essentially drives the urgency, the need, for parents.
Well, sure. Every parent, I mean, I can see where it comes from, because every parent's like, look, my kid's in 3rd grade. I need them to get to 4th grade because I can't hold them back. Right. Like, and it's the parental anxiety, everything around it. I completely see where that would be the filter or the lens that they would see this problem through.
Yeah. And then the other thing also is parent denial is very real. Like, every parent. No, you're kidding me. Parents, they don't want to admit stuff. No, that doesn't happen. I know. I know I've had calls that I've been on, where we're onboarding them and they're like, yeah, they mix up their B's and D's, and this, and I'm like, in my head, I'm thinking, oh my God, she needs help now. Like, don't wait. It's like, and obviously I'm not saying that, but they're like, no, I'll just wait. I think it'll go away. Yeah. And so
they'll grow out of it.
Yeah, that I think is hard too, because they're like, maybe we don't need this after all. But then they come back like, later saying, okay, now we definitely need this. And I know that because I've been that parent.
Sure. Where, I'm raising my hand right now. I've been in denial about many things about my children. Luckily, I have a wife who is not. That's beautiful. That helps. Yeah. Suchi, I always feel like I could have, like 3 more hours of conversation on these topics, but we probably have to bring this to a close for our listeners. What is my final question is always the same is, you're in, a founder, a startup, this is a really hot topic. You're doing great. What are you most excited about for, coming down the pipe in 6 months, 12 months, that's not Learnfully, right? Like other tech, shiny new object, new process, anything what are you paying attention to that you want to tell others about?
I'm actually really excited about how the education industry is changing. So what's interesting is, like how this is probably not the best analogy, but you know how people started moving away from Oracle and SAP and going into like a more fragmented software world. You know, I'm finding a lot of education companies just coming up, you know, to essentially help your kid, like, you know, have an interest or, you know, have some kind of a micro goal or some kind of education. So to me, like the strength-based interest is just so interesting. And parents now have the opportunity to essentially take that into their own hands. And actually a lot of parents are not saying, I want my kid to get all A's, right? They're saying, I want my kid to love and excel what he or she is good at. I want them to realize it, and I want them to do that. And there's a lot of support that's like popping out for that, which, you know, really excites me. Because my kid is 10, but he talks about history like a 30-year-old man. Wow. Now, where do I get someone like that? So, you know, so that has opened up. There's kids, you know, across the country who essentially are, you know, able to come and form groups in secure ways, of course, and have conversations on like Thomas Jefferson and how good or bad he was. And that to me is just so exciting because now I can nurture what he truly likes. And I think a lot of parents, you know, like would like to do that as well. Because at the end of the day, you want your kid to, you know, be motivated, be happy about being in their tribe. And I think, you know, COVID has helped, you know, build out the technology to essentially open that up, which is what it makes me. Yeah.
Child happiness. It is underrated goal. And well, child happiness leads to parent happiness.
Right, exactly. It's not parent happiness.
Suchi, I'm going to call you the wrong name just because of it, but Suchi Deshpande, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. This is, you are the founder, the creator of Learnfully.
Co-founder, yep.
Co-founder of Learnfully. I look forward to circling back with you in a while and seeing how things are going, but thank you so much for your time today.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Thanks again for tuning into today's episode of the eLearning Podcast. If you like what you heard, please do me the favor of following us on LinkedIn, Twitter, or whichever social media you prefer. Also, if you're interested in diving deeper on e-learning, I encourage you to get your free ticket to the eLearning Success Summit, where there are more than 70 hours of presentations on best practices. Just go to elearningsuccesssummit.com. And then finally, for the latest news, information, and resources about e-learning, come subscribe to our newsletter at lmspulse.com. Thanks.